Hello friends, this is Growl. Today I wanted to cover specific Resto Shaman gameplay in Mythic Plus for Shadowlands. If you're in the process of deciding what class you want to main, this video is designed to give you some insight as to what I think about the current state of Resto Shaman and what dungeons will be like. I want to cover the basics in this video, along with some Covenant and talent choices that I think may be best. And at the end, I'm going to give my best guess as to how I would rank it and answer some of the more common questions I get from my stream. I'll be sure to leave a table of contents for the video time if you're already familiar with the basics and want to skip ahead. My first healer that I played in World of Warcraft was a Resto Shaman, so although they weren't super favorable in Battle for Azeroth, I still wanted to test them to see what they're capable of now. Resto Shaman specializes in stacked area of effect healing. Its two key group healing spells, Healing Rain and Chain Heal, can potentially do large, consistent numbers if everyone is grouped together. Shaman also has a ton of totems both for utility and throughput. Lava Shock and Lava Burst have strong single target damage. Although you won't be blasting AoE damage in big trash packs, Shaman can still meaningfully contribute to bosses or priority targets during low damage moments. Along with its stacked AoE healing, Shaman's biggest strength right now is its interrupt. In dungeons, there can be many situations where your group just doesn't have enough interrupts. The Shadowlands meta right now is actually an interesting situation, where range classes seem pretty strong, however they also have longer cooldown interrupts, and this could present a unique opportunity for shamans to allow groups of 2 or even 3 range players to still succeed. As a healer, I love having an interrupt in pug groups especially. Your reliance on the group's coordination goes way down, and you can always reserve your interrupt for the extremely deadly casts. In many situations, an interrupt can prevent more damage than any amount of healing could. Shamans are also the only healer with Bloodlust. With the changes coming in Shadowlands, using a natural Bloodlust will be twice as effective as using drums. As a shaman, you have an opportunity to get invited over other healers to groups that don't have a lust yet. I think Shaman actually fits quite well in a lot of dungeon groups now. Their stacked AoE healing and Bloodlust work really well in heavy melee groups, and the added interrupt can be great for heavy range groups. Shaman also has some nice utility like Purge, Tremor Totem, and Earth Ellie. Reincarnation is also a very commonly overlooked ability and will definitely save your group some long walks back on some of these dungeons without checkpoints. Unfortunately, there are also some weaknesses that Shaman struggles with. The biggest one is sustained single target healing. Earthshield becoming baseline is a nice change, however, heavy single target damage is still pretty rough. Shamans don't really have a good way to ramp up healing like other healers do, and no external damage reduction aside from Spirit Link Totem, which only lasts for 5 seconds every 3 minutes. You'll be stuck spamming Healing Surge with the occasional Riptide and praying that your tank can get away safely. I would have really liked to see some sort of talent or legendary that adds a sort of percent damage reduction component to Earthshield somehow. The flat heals and increased healing from Earthshield seem reasonable for lower keys, but I know from experience that if you start moving up into stuff that hits harder, it becomes a lot less valuable. Although I mentioned stacked area of effect healing being a strength, it also very often is a weakness. You rely on your team being close together to do big group healing, and there are often mechanics or affixes like the new Storming or Spiteful that cause people to spread out and never come back together. When these are paired with high group damage, it can be a nightmare for Shaman when you can't get your chain heal to bounce. Dungeon pugs tend to be the biggest offenders to this. There's always that one hunter or mage that insists on standing 50 yards away from everyone else and is extremely difficult to heal. Shamans also, for some reason, can't dispel poisons or diseases, so it can be a bit frustrating against ones that do very high amounts of damage. In Shadowlands, you choose to align with one Covenant. For Resto Shaman, although I saw most people playing Kyrian, I think I liked Venthyr the best. Venthyr gives access to Chain Harvest, which is a big AoE damage ability and a bit of healing to it as well. This ability feels great because it gives you something to press on big pulls where normally Shaman damage isn't that great. It also scales with Critical Strike, lowering the cooldown slightly for each target that you crit, which is a stat you often see Shamans having a lot of. Door of Shadows also can come in handy, especially for dungeons where you need to get past mobs. Even though Shaman doesn't have stealth, Door of Shadows can still help you sneak by trash packs to help you get back to your group or get ahead of one to mass res. Chain Harvest was quite lackluster for healing though, so it's very likely this won't be a good choice for raid or PvP, which will be quite annoying. Shamans also have a pretty diverse selection of legendary powers. Although they don't really fill any big weaknesses that Shaman had, they were still fun to use. I'll go over a couple of them now. The one I think will be probably the most useful is Jonats. Each healing surge or healing wave you do empowers the next chain heal. For Mythic Plus and Raid, these are both pretty useful, giving you more incentive to use up all of your tidal waves on single target heals while weaving in big chain heals. For Raid, it's also possible that people use the Mana Tide legendary, however I found this one less useful in dungeons. I played around a bit with a few others as well, including the Chain Heal Chain Lightning instant cast legendary. This one was super fun to use, however it just felt a bit clunky a lot of the time. Generally, you need to use Chain Heal on bosses and single target mobs that do big AoE, and you don't want to be casting Chain Lightning on those. And then on the big packs that you want to use Chain Lightning, it's usually not going to be a lot of group healing and instead more single target tank healing. Another one I had some fun with was actually Deep Tremor Stone, the one that attaches an earthquake around the Earth Elemental. This one was actually really strong in big packs and turns your Earth Ellie into a huge damage cooldown. It was owning pretty hard in the dungeons I was using it in, however as you move up into higher keys, your Earth Ellie is going to start to die easily and you won't get as much value from it. I also think there's some potential around the one that procs Ascendance occasionally when you use Riptide, however it was bugged in my testing so I didn't get to try it out much. This is the talent setup I've been running in dungeons. It's pretty reminiscent of a BFA talent tree. First row, you could go in any direction. It just sort of depends on what sort of encounters you're struggling with. I was testing all three, depending on what legendary I was using or what dungeon I was in. I like the Ascendance over High Tide as it gives you a powerful CD that you can use to catch up if you fall behind. Surge of Earth felt really lackluster, and again, I'd really like to see it reworked into some sort of damage reduction talent before release, although that seems a bit unlikely at this point. Now that we have a baseline of understanding, how would I rank Resto Shaman for dungeon healing in Shadowlands? I think I give Shaman a 7 out of 10 score. It definitely gets the job done and has some handy utility, however falls a bit short of things like Druid, Battle Res, and Priest damage. I think if you enjoyed Shaman and BFA, you'll definitely like playing it in Shadowlands, however there wasn't enough new added to the kit in order to make it one of the meta healers. Before I wrap up the video, I do want to talk about some of the questions I get asked most about Shaman that didn't quite get covered in this video. So then, what would need to change to make Shaman a meta healer? I think the pieces are halfway there, and that's sort of why I'm happy with Shaman, but at the same time I don't think they're going to be a top pick. The damage Shaman does is comparable with some of the other healers because of the target cap now, especially when you run the Chain Harvest Covenant ability. Also, I would say many more of the encounters in Shadowlands are more focused on group healing and not single target healing. There was a lot of really tough single target healing checks in BFA, and although there's still a few now, there aren't nearly as many. Being a strong group healer, especially not relying on CDs because of Prideful, is pretty valuable. Still though, having weak tank healing means that Shaman is going to suffer a bit as keys get really high. Discipline, Druid, and Holy Pallies all have big damage reduction externals that they can put on tanks for tougher trash damage pulls, and Shaman really only has SLT, which is super strong, but is really conditional because it only lasts 5 seconds out of every 3 minutes, and you have to have people in melee. Like, if you have only one person, like, only a rogue in melee with the tank, it's not going to do that much if you have, let's say, a mage and a warlock in your group. How different is having an interrupt as a healer? Having an interrupt actually owns. When you don't really notice it if you only play Shaman or if you only play another healer, but if you play a healer with an interrupt and without it, it's like night and day. By far, it's the biggest playstyle difference that separates Shaman, I think. You might not, it might seem weird if you're traditionally a raid healer or you haven't played Shaman at all in dungeons, but for pugs especially, if you have good knowledge of the dungeon, it can actually make a world of difference. It can be a little hard to juggle sometimes if the pull requires a lot of healing, but it definitely feels good. I really do think the meta right now favors ranged DPS a bit, and especially if you end up in groups like 2 or 3 ranged, having that extra interrupt will make a big difference. That covers everything I wanted to talk about for Resto Shaman dungeon gameplay in Shadowlands. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe to my channel. I'll be covering tons of Shadowlands healer content from beginner all the way to the highest levels of Mythic Plus. Happy keying!